Helicopters are terrifying when you're under threat. It's kind of side to side, up and most scarily down. And the windows are really small. And those little things you sit on, they're really hard. And this was 25 years ago. We were given 3 minutes warning to get out. We were in Timor L'Este. There was a group of Indonesians that were coming for us, and it basically just touched the ground. We jumped in, and as we were taking off, there was some downdraft. I don't know what downdraft is, but it's something about a hill and air and stuff like that. And so we're being chucked about on the back, and the pilot's shouting and all that stuff. And in the evening, as we were having a pint, this was a really good story. No one ever thought that this would be traumatizing. That was never a thought, at least not for us in 2000, humanitarians. It was terrifying. In 2005, I came back to Britain and I retrained as a psychologist and child psychotherapist. And it was weird, because they were talking a lot about like soldiers and humanitarians like us. You guys are here. And my focus was children, so they were talking a lot about children. And again, they were only talking about trauma. They weren't talking about growth and how we strengthen and how we learn and become more resilient through our difficulties. But that was kind of the central topic for us out there in my old job. People got upset, they grew stronger, they learned, they taught the new ones. So I was really torn between these two stories. I then became clinical director for OTR in Bristol. And also worked in lots of pupil referral units, rather got beaten up in lots of pupil referral units. And same thing there, trauma, everywhere. And trauma, and this is the thing, trauma as separate from suffering. And my objective with this talk today is to query that idea. To query trauma, not to query suffering. Sometimes when I speak about these things, people go, like this really beautiful speech, or the book that you've written. This is not about querying the suffering. It's to query the usefulness of the trauma discourse. It's about how we can be with difficulty. Because everyone here, on a daily basis, we meet someone who's dealing with difficulty. That's how shit the world is. And every such meeting is an opportunity to get it wrong, to get perfectly right, or maybe just a little bit better. So how do we acknowledge distress, or trauma as some people call it, stay with it enough, while still being open to growth? It's that subtle balance. You want to taste the soup, but you don't stick your head in the bowl, you use a spoon. As ChatGPT told me I should. It wasn't that good. So this talk is different from Asha's talk. She's not here to debate me, and I'm just, you'll just have to see it as two different stories. And you go back and do your research, go a little bit deeper than Wikipedia, please. I share Asha's focus on children. I share her outrage and her concern. And yours. But I have a different solution. Actually, my solution might not be that different from yours. See what you think. So, what do we mean by trauma and traumatization? Trauma comes from the Greek word wound, but it's gradually kind of become a different kind of wound, right? We have a bit of suffering. I'm not going to step on your foot, but what if I did? That would be suffering, right? And when does that become trauma? Once you get into that trauma world, a lot of people seem to believe that something new happens. I think that's the issue. Now, if we just kind of go back in time in the West to like maybe 1970, or we can stay right now and just go to any other country outside the West, we can look back thousands of years of recorded history or psychic wounds and responses to them. There's very little support for any side categorical difference between suffering and trauma. It's just suffering. It seems like what happens to you, sorry, I'm going to talk about stepping on your foot here all the time, but what happens is the stepping on the foot with my big boots, your specific history, who you are, and also the culture. If we are in the great cult of loving people stepping on our toes, then, you know, maybe this is great. If not, so culture mediates it, right? I'm terrified of snakes. If I go into a snake pit, it'd be terrifying for me. If it was Indiana Jones or Lara Croft or someone really cool, they'll be chill about it. If there was like a snake lover, they would really love it. But it would be mediated by culture. Culture tells us how we should suffer. So the event, whether it's snakes or helicopters, the event, the person, the culture. And we can see this. People talk about PTSD as if it's one thing. It's not. It's not. Soldiers in the American Civil War, they experienced a sense of weak heartbeat. Women escaping the Civil War in El Salvador talked about calorias. It's heat. You look at World War I shell shock, they talk about tics and joint pains. That's very different from the PTSD of dissociation that we talk about today. Don't get me wrong. People are not making this stuff up. I'm just saying that we learn to express suffering through our culture. And if culture tells you that this is how you should express suffering, then you'll express it like that. You're not faking it. It's a culturally mediated thing. Now the take-home message of that is that this is not a biological process that is mediated by this supposed 3 layers of the brain or polyvagal theory with some strange neurology that doesn't make sense. So, bad events have bad effects. And we just need to understand the event, the experience, and the culture. I think that we need to respect non-Western cultures much more than we do. I was working in Sri Lanka in 2004 and 2003 as well, and I managed to get out just before the tsunami, 1 week before. Good timing. And I was sitting in Sweden as my old colleagues were calling me, updating me with the situation. And some of them were telling about this virtual army. Hopefully none of you that's here went there. I won't like you. This virtual army of counselors that descended upon Sri Lanka. You remember the tsunami, right? And they came there with their crayons and their papers, and they were all like, oh, let's do trauma therapy. And the kids were like, I want to go to school. And they're, oh, you're in denial. I step on you, I think it's a child. So you're in denial if you don't want this treatment. It ended up being so bad that University of Colombo, that's the capital of Sri Lanka, went out with an official letter saying, firmly requesting Western agencies to cease to treat the survivors as psychological casualties. According to this letter, to see the effects of trauma as a physiological reaction in the brain rather than a cultural communication was not only incorrect, but deeply undermining of their resilience. Now that's the key. I don't really care if it's incorrect with vagal theories or triune brains, but if it's disabling. So if Sri Lankans think that Western ideas of trauma are so disabling, and if this Western idea of separating trauma from suffering is so different from All other cultures, Nigerians don't do it, Bangladeshis don't do it. We didn't do it in the 60s. Why do we even have these ideas? So despite the lack of evidence, and sometimes quite solid evidence against these theories, the therapeutic community tends to take these trauma theories as the gospel. Not the good. Without query and critique. And what therapists think has an effect on our culture in our countries. In the US, so I'm an officer now in the British Army. My colleagues in the US, they've spent, well, ex-colleagues maybe, it's a bit messy, isn't it? They've spent $500 million on the comprehensive soldier fitness program that will inoculate people against trauma. It has had no zilch measurable effects so far. That's $500 million. Also, the way that therapists speak tend to seep out into mainstream culture. And I think, that's what I'm going to get into now, that's furthering victimhood, defeatism and objectification. So, what happens when we apply a label of trauma? According to me. This is my theory. It's not Asha's theory. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm wrong. But my theory is that when we apply a label of trauma to ourselves and to others, the following happens. But before I get into that, I'm going to... Nassim Taleb, this little thing. Nassim Taleb is a Lebanese philosopher, fantastically rude and arrogant, but often right. He talks about 3 different categories of things. Some things are robust. I'm going to find something robust here. This is robust. I could bash it around, right? Some things are fragile. I'm not going to bash this one around. And some things are anti-fragile. And if you take one thing from all that I'm babbling about today, take the anti-fragile. If I do this, a lot of times, these little puny biceps will get bigger. If I stress something that's anti-fragile, it becomes stronger. Like that fire. It gets stronger by the wind and not snuffed out, like the candle right next to it. Now you all know this. Every time you struggled with Shakespeare and got better at reading, every time you struggled with times tables and got better at counting, every time that you were terrible on the soccer pitch, you ran a little bit harder, you got stronger. Every time that you were a terrible friend to your friends, and you stepped up, you became a better friend. Now, an individual convinced of their own resilience, they don't see themselves as likely to be traumatized. So I don't think that they're as likely to interpret these scary, terrible, suffering events as traumatic. They'll be less psychologically vulnerable to them. They'll still suffer, they just won't have that kind of trauma. But when I talk to clients and colleagues in the army today, people are so enmeshed in these stories of trauma. And these narratives, this is new. Remember this. This whole trauma narrative is 20 years, max. Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate. These are new guys. And they are not reflected in the world image. Even become a concept creep where if you feel that you're traumatized by the fact that I didn't pick on you and I picked on him, well, technically you're traumatized. What was it about us humanitarians that made us so effective at dealing with adversity? Was it this fantastic neurological traits that you see before you? I don't think so. I think it was because of our story. Now, if it is our story, if narratives and social constructs can actually change how we feel, right? Which seems obvious if some Salvadorian women had calorias and some people get traumatized, some people don't. If narratives and stories can change how we feel, wouldn't it be wise to have the narratives and stories that make us suffer least? I believe that to identify into the trauma category is to place yourself in a position of very little agency, very little freedom, being unable to do the work that you did. So kind of undermining the possibility of growth, of becoming a father, despite having a child. Help another. So it becomes, this is a long sentence, but you can bear with me on this sentence. If we see the resentment, the traumatization, as the curse that we put upon ourselves, yeah? I stand on your foot, and then you're resentful. This is not fair. Swedish officers in the British Army always step on my foot. I have a right to not suffer. That right to not suffer, your refusal to accept how irritating I am, especially if I keep on picking on you, I think it becomes a curse that you need to let go of. And then you'll just have a slightly wonky foot, but you won't be traumatized. Almost done. So, you gotta have a punchline, right? How do we do it? What do I want us to do? I want us to reframe the trauma discourse to produce growth. Untainted growth. It's possible, but it takes solid commitment from both the client and the therapist to step past these poison narratives and this culture of resentment. It was evident in my doctoral research on humanitarians. It's evident when I see units coming back from Lord knows where, from places that would be genuinely described as traumatic. As a general rule, impact increases unit cohesiveness in the Army. Sense of resilience and willpower. Okay, for me, as a therapist, if I'm working with, so I'm going to let go of you. If I'm working with you, and you come to me, and you feel that you've been traumatized, you've had a terrible event. My first rule, despite my theories about trauma, is to totally hear you out. I've got to understand what your story is. But I want to know more than just the trauma. I want to know where you come from, what your meaning is, what's important to you. You're much bigger than your trauma. And once I understand you, once I've situated you in a rich setting or a rich understanding of a bleak setting, I'm going to start to focus on the stuff. And traumatization is often presented as this, like, this is how it is. It's in the body. This horrible thing that happened to me, and it's part of my identity. I'm not going to let go of it. And it was horrible. And I'm going to be hurt by it forever. My job as a therapist is going to go, okay, it's going to be forever. Does it have to be always? Every time you feel like you're triggered by something, is there a millisecond where maybe you can be a little bit less triggered? Right? I'm opening it up. I'm not going, come on, step up. You could do better than that. I'm with you. My work is at the edges of fixity. This is especially true when the trauma label has been affixed by others. You might be totally fine with me, because I'm back at you again. Fine about me stepping on your foot. But you guys might go, how are you doing? Are you okay? Yeah. I feel traumatized. If he's not, well, he's obviously in denial, right? Some people blame victims. Some people judge those that refuse to be victims. I remember with great fondness and admiration clients that traveled this journey from either self-imposed or culturally imposed paralysis in trauma narratives, and how they first insisted on an unequivocal affirmation, and they got it. And then the other narratives, like, we had little exceptions. And in the end, they grasped the free choice to fully own exactly who they are, including all the suffering, including all the shit, including the scars, including the stuff that will never be solved. But this is how it is. You embrace the suffering. So, to end this, Given how the inscription of trauma, the idea of trauma as something permanent, seem to have a great risk of it invalidating, disempowering us, how should we move forward in a skillful way? I think we should just get rid of the term. Let's just talk about human experience, which includes adversity, suffering, to the level that we heard earlier. That's it. No special categories. No special polyvagal theories, triune brains, body keeps a score. None of that. It might seem radical, but it's not radical for a majority of the world. It's just radical for us in the past 20 years. Moving away from the label, we could return to the consensus of other cultures and times where life happens and we do our best to learn from it. Our jobs in the caring professions would be to care and leap ahead and indicate anti-fragile ways of dealing with difficult experiences. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there really is such a thing as PTSD that happens in the most extreme of cases. If that's the case, I don't know how we could have mentally endured hundreds of thousands of years as a species on the savannah, being hunted by hyenas, hunger, and each other. Maybe the shamans were better than us psychotherapists. I really don't. But what I do know from my travels in clinical practice, war, and research, is that the trauma label is a double-edged sword to be used with extreme caution. I have absolutely no doubt that those, like Asha, who believe in and practice trauma therapy are genuinely good and caring people. But what I've seen, it seems to me at least, that these good intentions have been the road to many of my clients' road to health. Marx famously referred to religion as the opium of the people, a soothing balm that allows relief, but also stops the revolution. Perhaps we can see the current tendency to see adversity as trauma as just like that. Comforting, yet disabling. Poison chalice. And now you can all shout. I've written some stuff about this. Any questions? Anyone outraged? This is going to hurt? Go for it.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. It's really, really valuable. I used to be an off-record therapist, so really? I sit on your side of the trauma fence. I'd like to highlight that. And I also work as a liberation practitioner, as a liberation therapist, so that's rooted in Latin American collective culture. So I would like to preface my question with that. However, there's a very specific aspect of what you're talking about that we work with at APOCA. We support Polish migrant families. And my curiosity is, what would you say from your experience, what's your advice for working with individuals whose cultural positioning is layered? Practically speaking, we're dealing with people who come from resilient communities, but live in a community where that's not the case, where the resilience is not supported. Plus, additionally, from my own experience as a migrant, we over-deliver 200%. Because we feel it's part of our identity to get on with things, to be more resilient. So I think there's a beauty in what you're saying, but there's also a tension in people even accessing support that maybe is available, or maybe not receiving, because a lot of what you're talking about links to the collective care, and I hear that. But what if that collective care is not in place?
Yeah.
Just want to think about those liminal places. Any advice?
Such a good question. So if you all hear, like, how do we work when we have multiple layers of culture, right? So, so you have a Polish background, you often have a Catholic background. It's a great treasure trove to draw upon. And for some Catholics will be a great source of shame. Like, you know, it's good and bad, right? And then we have this world. I mean, my first answer is, of course, I don't know. My second answer is that, to agree with the previous speaker, Whenever I have a client that comes into my room and he tells me that he's a Muslim, he's a Hindu, he's a Christian, even Sikh, I am overjoyed. Because there you have a value base, you have something to pull upon, something good. And I guess if you work in South America, you would have a similar treasure trove to draw upon. And as an existential psychotherapist, I would probably go, if you were sitting opposite me, I would go, how do you want to build your own resilience thing? How do you want to pull upon some of the Catholic stuff, some of the Western stuff? Yeah, that's as good an answer. Anyone else have a good answer, better answer to that? In a multi-layered cake, I say pick out the raisins. Is my answer to you. I'll probably come up with a better answer in a coffee later. Anything? Oh, I'm totally out of time, right?
Is that
Fortunately, Niklas, we could listen to you for.
My voice can't do it.
Can I have one more question? Is that linked with acculturation? Why we are not talking about acculturation stress? You know, me as other, you know, is like, I feel horrible if I need to tick a box, I'm other white, for example. Which straight away I'm not other white. But this is when we as people coming from different countries, and I'm not talking only about Polish people, but everyone, when you are working in that diverse community, I think we are lacking of understanding these communities and how they are brought up in their own countries.
Absolutely. Well, I'll just to quickly answer that, and then I will shut up. In terms of acculturation, yes, that is a problem, but let's be careful. You're not traumatized because you have to take that box. It's just suffering.